Right, so this is going to be a quick video about Murderbot, the first two books. I have read All Systems Red, and I have read Artificial Condition, and I'm currently reading Rogue Protocol. At the moment, these are very short books. They aren't really books, actually they're novellas. And they kind of suffer from being novellas, while also I think the fact that they're novellas are one of their greatest strengths. So it's kind of a mixed bag. It's kind of a balancing act as to whether it's a good thing or a bad thing that these are novellas and not just full-length novels. But I think ultimately stretching these books out into novels would have been very good. So overall, that's fine. I do like the bite-size kind of length of these novels. They're about 150 pages long each, and they get the job done. So I think first I will talk about the things that I like about Murderbot. This is going to be a bit of a quick video compared to the other videos that I've done about Mistborn, stuff like that, because it's just the first two books, and because I'm just kind of documenting my initial thoughts on the series. I know this book has a really strong cult following. I do want to say that I do like these books. I think they're good. That being said, I think they're also extremely flawed, and I'm going to talk about the things that I didn't like as well as the things that I do like. That being said, the things I like massively outweigh the things I don't like, as is the case with Brandon Sanderson's books that I've also done videos on. So first, I want to talk about the things that I do like about these books so far. And the first thing is that I really like Murderbot as a character, which is basically the entire reason I like these books, which is good because they're basically a character piece, and fundamentally the books are about Murderbot and only Murderbot, and everything else just exists to prop up that one concept. These books are a character study about this creature, we'll call it, called Murderbot, who basically was once a sec unit, which is basically a construct, a cloned human who also has robotic parts, is a mixture between robot and human, a cyborg I suppose, and they have this thing called a governor module that will kill them if they don't follow orders. However, before the start of the books they have hacked it. Before the start of these books they were basically just going along the motions of doing their job so that they don't get found out that they've hacked their governor module and that they're rogue, and they basically just do jobs that they're forced to do, as is their function. And the first book basically starts with Murderbot meeting some scientists and being sent on an expedition with them and developing its first kind of relationship with the human. And this is really where Murderbot shines. Murderbot is basically just a series about a robot that has no personality. It's a blank slate of sorts with some pre-programmed personality traits, like a need to do security and a need to protect humans, and also violent urges, which are part of its ability to basically fight and kill in order to protect humans. And overall, I think that its relationships with other characters, and, well, not just people, robots as well, other robots, and AI, is really what makes these books good, is what keeps me reading them. I also just think Murderbot is such a realised character. They have such a realised voice as a character. A lot of the prose is written in such a way that Murderbot kind of has this unique voice that comes through in the text, and a lot of little things are kind of presented to you through their lens, through Murderbot's lens. For example, I'm talking about things like the fact that Murderbot never really describes what humans look like, because Murderbot doesn't care what humans look like. Generally, it always goes on about how bad it is at telling age, how old people are from their appearance, for example. And I think that's really cool, and that's just one example of one of the many things that makes the characterization of Murderbot in these books really good. I also just really want to see where Murderbot goes as a character. The thing that keeps me reading is wanting to see what Murderbot decides to do with its life. At the start, it's just kind of going through the motions, just so it can watch media, because it's a socially awkward character that just likes to watch TV shows, basically. It finds them better than real life, something that I'm sure a lot of people will be able to empathise with, myself included. So overall, Murderbot as a character is pretty great. Don't really have anything negative to say about Murderbot at all, which is good, because this is basically going to be the crux of my entire point about why I like these books overall, even though I have so many negative things to say about them. The books exist to be a diary of this character, Murderbot. its relationships with others, and its journey. And I think if that's what you focus on, these are really great books. Also want to say that I really do think the setting is quite cool. It's kind of a generic corporate sci-fi setting. I do think some of its concepts kind of bash against each other a little bit, but the setting itself overall is very minimal. The world building is only presented to us in a way that matters, and what I mean by that is the only things that I mentioned are things that are directly relevant to Murderbot or the story. Murderbot doesn't care about a lot of things because they're a murder robot. The truth is that they just don't care about a lot of things that people do, and this is very well presented in the books, and as a result you do get the idea that there's a lot more going on that Murderbot just isn't explaining, because Murderbot just doesn't give a shit about it. And I think this is fine. I think this is actually a strength of the books. I think that there's very little exposition, and the exposition that's there feels necessary. And also it builds the world up. There's some cool little background stuff going on, with aliens being kind of maybe discovered recently. I also think the representation of just AI as a concept in these books is done extremely fucking well. For example, one of the side characters in the second book is a AI called Art. Art is basically an AI that drives a research ship around, flies the research ship around, and runs the research ship. The research ship is huge. It has its own medical bay, it has storage, it has laboratories on board, and all of these things are basically within its body, so that it can control with its mind. So as you can imagine, Art has a vast consciousness, and that is represented quite well. I think the way that it's represented with Murderbot immediately basically feeling like they're in a room with something that's so powerful that it could smother it and destroy it instantly, rip it apart, just using data feeds, was really cool. Overall, Murderbot's interaction with AI is my personal favourite part about these books. I think it's really well presented. And this is all part of the setting and the world building, and it's just done really well. The world building's minimal, what is there is extremely effective. One thing that I think Martha Wells is really good at presenting, and that's what it would be like to be a construct. And what I mean by that is she's very good at having Murderbot show to us how it's different on an existential level to have the body of a construct and the physical capabilities of a construct versus those of being a human. For example, she's very good at intuitively describing concepts like how it feels to process data or interact with other AI through data feeds. The most prominent example of this is, so far, Murderbot's interaction with Art. She's also very good at describing how everything is networked and how Murderbot is able to basically interact with all of the systems in the world around them by using their brain and their mind and their inherent capabilities as a construct. She's also very good at explaining the difference between how a human using an interface method such as a visor or something like that interacts with these systems, and how an augmented human interacts with these systems compared to a construct like Murderbot. And you actually get quite a strong understanding of what Murderbot and other constructs and AI can actually do in this world, and how they kind of probably live in a way that's kind of below the notice of normal humans. And what I mean by this is AI and constructs are kind of able to basically remove any records of anything that they've done that they shouldn't have done. So for example, Art is allowed to have Murderbot come on board and travel with them and stow away. And they're able to do this because they're able to basically hide the evidence that this ever happened. So, weirdly, I want to kind of compare this to Toy Story. In Toy Story, there's kind of this, the toys kind of have this like secret life that they live that the humans don't see. And when the humans see them, they're just being toys. But when the humans aren't looking, they're kind of doing whatever they want. And in this way, this is kind of how the AI are in this. When the humans are around and looking at their logs, they're only seeing the world that the AI and constructs want to show them. They're not seeing all the mischief and stuff that the AI get up to when the humans aren't looking. I think this kind of adds this whimsical kind of element and adds so much character to the AI in these books. I mean, even Murderbot's interactions with some of the really basic AI, like some of the drones and some of the transports that he uses to move from A to B, is just really well done. Overall, I want to say that I think this is one of the best things about this series, and one of the things that keeps me reading is I just want to see Murderbot develop relationships with other robots, and I want to see how that goes. And I want to say that although I'm going to criticise later on the prose in these books, this is one thing that Martha Wells is very good at writing and is very well done. I think that's pretty much everything that I want to say that I like about these books. I'm going to go on to the things that I didn't really like. So the first thing I want to say that I really didn't like about these books is the prose. Now, I don't usually care about prose as long as it's effectively conveying the information to me that needs to be conveyed. I generally don't mind it. Although I do appreciate well written and beautifully written prose, I don't think it's necessary for a book to be good. I also don't think that good prose will make a bad book good, and I don't think that bad prose will make a good book bad. That being said, these books can just be downright confusing and hard to read sometimes. The way some of the situations, and especially some of the action scenes, are explained is borderline fucking confusing. Martha will use very vague terms to describe directions and where things are in context to Murderbot in a way that's very unintuitive and can make visualizing the scene that's being explained to me a clusterfuck at best. That being said, this is mostly in the first book, and I did notice a significant improvement in this respect in the second book. And now that I'm reading the third book, there's also quite a bit in that, in terms of action, that's a bit more easy to follow, but only a bit. Not that this really matters, because the action scenes are usually pretty simple. I do think there's a big difference between an author who's good at writing action, like Jim Butcher or Brandon Sanderson, and an author that's not good at writing action. Maybe it's because I'm going from Brandon Sanderson to this, the difference feels humongous. But it's not really affecting my enjoyment that much. I only really need to know what's going on. I only really need to know who Murderbot is beating the shit out of. And that's really enough. So overall, I think the problem with the prose is I just think it can be confusing. Also, it is written in the past tense, and there's a lot of had going on. I had, Murderbot had, you know, that kind of thing, and it can make reading it be a bit rough. But overall, I don't think the prose is too bad. I think it's alright, but it does come across as very amateurish sometimes. That being said, I do want to say that sometimes some parts of the prose do feel like they're being written that way because they are through the lens of Murderbot as a character. Murderbot as a character is a bit limited in some ways. They don't understand why people care what people look like and things like that, so they don't really describe what characters look like. Characters not being described what they look like, and then just you being told their names and expecting to know who the fuck they are when they're talking, or whatever the hell is going on, is one of my biggest criticisms of this book. That being said, I don't think it's necessary really to remember who the characters are, because the plots in these books are so fucking simple and to the point, and they're 150 pages long each. So it's not too big of a deal. Really, you're reading these books for Murderbot. And if you like Murderbot, you'll like these books. I think these books really are hinging on that one thing. So like I said, this kind of loops back around to my original point, which is that if you like Murderbot, you'll like these books. In conclusion to this point, ultimately it can just be hard to tell what's going on sometimes. I can't really remember who the characters are very effectively because they're barely described. And also, sometimes the action is just fucking borderline confusing. The other main problem I have with this is I don't like the amount of throwaway characters that get introduced in each book. I can barely tell them apart. I forget their names all the time. In the first book, there are about 8 or 9 characters that are introduced right at the start, within the first chapter. These characters are all named but not described. I think one of the characters is described vaguely as having grey hair. That's it. How the fuck am I supposed to remember who these characters are? Okay, fair enough, it's a novella, and they don't really matter. But then that begs the question of why you're introducing so many characters at once anyway in the first place. In the first book, at least, only 3 of the characters felt like they even needed to be there. That is the members of the research group that Murderbot is originally with. Most of them just felt like they were there to be there and just waste page count. I feel like they could have easily made it so that there were only 3 or 4 members in the entire research group, and they could have cut half the cast out. I don't even really remember any of their names. This is a massive weakness of these books. So far, the only side character that I give a single fuck about is Art. And I really liked Art in the second book, Artificial Condition. But the second book also had this same problem, where Murderbot is basically working as a security consultant for a bunch of humans. And goddamn, I finished this book 3 days ago and I can't remember a single name of any of the characters. One of them is described as having multicolored hair. That's all I can remember. I remember one of them talking about their mother and saying that fear is an artificial condition, where the name of the book comes from. The only reason I cared about the characters at all is just as a narrative device for Murderbot to give a shit about. And this is not too big of a deal because they are ultimately throwaway characters. We'll probably never see them again. They probably won't ever matter again. Murderbot will move on to the next story and the next thing, and these characters will never be run into again. And I can't help but feel like Art will turn up again, because Art is the only character that Murderbot ever develops any kind of serious relationship with. There's only one other character as well called Mensa, who from the first book is the only character I remember from that book, and was the only character I actually liked. There was an augmented human in that book as well, who was kind of important to the plot. There was also one other guy who Murderbot saves at the start, who's kind of important because they take Murderbot's side when everyone's deciding what to do with Murderbot, when they find out that Murderbot's actually a rogue sec unit. Quite frankly, the characters in these books are not a strength if you do not include Murderbot and Art. So far, like I said, Murderbot's interaction with the AI is by far my favourite part of this series, with the exception of Mensa, who Murderbot actually has a kind of important relationship with, and it's kind of a building block of Murderbot's personality and the way they see the world and other humans. So Mensa does get a shout out as a character that's actually interesting. Same with Art, obviously. But if you're hoping for a big cast of lovable cast of characters, these are not the books for that. There are so many throwaway characters that it's just ridiculous. I can only remember the names of 2 characters let me quickly do some maths and try and remember how many there are in total. So in the first 2 books, I think there's about 20 named characters. I remember the names of 2. Take from that what you will. But overall, I think there's just a lot of throwaway characters that just don't need to be there. There's no real reason they need to be in the book. Most of these stories could have been condensed down by having just the one human that interacts with Murderbot in a meaningful fashion. In the first book, I think the cast could have easily been cut down to 3 or 4, and in the second book, I think Murderbot could have easily been doing security for one person. All the others could have been back at the hotel like the rest of them were. It wouldn't have changed things at all. In fact, I think it would have strengthened it, because that would have given Martha Wells more time to focus on the relationship between Murderbot and that one character, which they kind of did in the second half of Artificial Condition, but overall it was underbaked. The only part of that relationship that was interesting really was watching Murderbot develop and become more comfortable with human interaction. But I guess we've circled around to the original point again, which is that if you like Murderbot, you'll like these books, even if all the characters are flawed and uninteresting, which so far they are, generally speaking. Murderbot completely carries the show. I also want to say that the action, I kind of touched on this in the prose, but the action in the first book is fucking awful, in my opinion. On the back of the books, I think the first one, it says, "Came for the gunfights, stayed for Murderbot." I find this to be downright fucking hilarious as a quote to put on this book, considering the gunfights in this book basically consist of Murderbot walking up to other sec units and then basically standing still and shooting each other, and then the one that wins is the one whose body gives out last. There's barely a fucking firefight. Murderbot just shoots fuckers and then gets shot, and that's the action. I think this is interesting from a world building perspective, that the sec units actually fight just through battles of attrition, essentially, and they don't fight by using tactics of any kind, because they're not designed for that. They're designed to stand there and take hits for the humans, and to shoot at things that might harm the humans. I just think from an action perspective, the fucking action in the first book was so shit. There was one little fist fight that Murderbot had with another sec unit at the end of the first book that I thought was okay, but generally, the action in the first book was absolutely forgettable and uninteresting. That being said, the action in the second book is a massive upgrade. Murderbot has some really badass scenes in Artificial Condition. That is to say, specifically, I liked the scene where Murderbot beat the ever-living shit out of 2 people, or it might have been 3 people that turned up to try and kill the people that Murderbot's protecting, and absolutely just fucks them up. This is a quick and dirty action scene, and I actually thought this is explained and described really well. It's basically described methodically as Murderbot essentially just methodically dispatches 3 people by breaking their limbs until they stop fighting. I also thought the last little bit of action at the end, when Murderbot is on the ship pretending to be captured and just starts fighting MFs, kills a room full of people, no problem, walks into a room while holding the main antagonist by the neck, and then sees that the human that he's protecting the whole time has been shot, and then just immediately breaks the bitch's neck and kills her mercilessly. Overall, I think the action in the second book was really good, and I thought it was a massive step up from the first book. That being said, the action in the first book I thought was very bad, sorry. This is basically one of my biggest problems with these books, but like I said, this has been somewhat mollified by the fact that the action in the second book was much better. So this might be a case of, I don't know what Martha Wells has and hasn't written in the past, so it might be a case that she's not just really ever written anything like this, and she's getting better as she goes, in which case I can see that. So yeah, the action in the first book was terrible. That being said, it gets better. One of the issues I had with the first book was I felt that some things were just really underdescribed. And I think I've mentioned this with the characters, and that is true with the characters, but I mean in general with just things. Like for example, the characters are driving around something called a hopper. It's not really clear what a hopper is, in my opinion, until the second half of the book, but they use a hopper quite a lot in the first half. They get in it and they move around in it and it goes from A to B, but it's not really clear how. It's not really clear how it looks either. Like, it could have been very easy for Martha to stick in just one line talking about how the heat from the hopper's engines or something were like, or Murderbot could feel the heat from the hopper's engines. That would have been a very easy way to basically put in the reader's mind that it's some kind of basically planetary exploration vehicle that's kind of just a plane basically, or a helicopter, but sci-fi, like a VTOL craft maybe. This really isn't explained at all, or even described. They just say, we get in the hopper and we leave. What the fuck's a hopper? This really annoyed me for the first book. Well, the first half anyway. Like, yeah, I guess the name Hopper, I guess you could say it could move from A to B. But I was thinking, because this is a sci-fi series, it was some kind of high-tech, like, pod or something that could, like, land, you could get in it, then it could go up to a space station and then get fired back down to the planet or something. Like it was hopping. Or maybe it was just basically like a pod that you could get in that had thrusters that could move. I don't know, I was really confused for the first half of this book as to what that is, and I think these books have this problem in general. Things are a bit underdescribed in my opinion. And this could be because Murderbot isn't explaining things that are obvious to it, but really I don't think that's a very good excuse for basic things not being explained. It makes it for a very difficult visual image, and then when the reader has created their own kind of visual image of what it is that a hopper is, you then explain halfway through the book what a hopper actually looks like, which might be completely different to the reader's idea of what it looks like now, so they have to completely change their mental image of what a hopper is. Just explain it at the fucking start. And this kind of ties into the fact that I don't think the prose is very good in these books generally. Overall, not a big deal, but I think things can be underdescribed. Murderbot themselves as well, I think their appearance is really underdescribed, and I'm not talking about their facial features or anything like that, because it makes sense that Murderbot wouldn't care about that, because it doesn't care about its fleshy bits, as long as they're intact and working. But Murderbot never describes what their armour looks like or anything. And that's fine, I suppose, because there is front cover art. That being said, what things look like on the front cover art of a book, and how they actually look in the book, are not how things actually look or are described to look, are not exactly known to line up very well. So I think this is a poor way to do it. I think sec units could be described a bit more. I also think the book, the books are cool, and they could possibly do with like some illustrations, maybe just like schematics of various things. Like at the end of a chapter, they could just put a thing in that's mentioned a lot, and it's just like a schematic, like a blueprint for that thing. Like in the leftover space at the top of a page, you could put in the blueprint for a gun, and it just have a line over it that says schematic for gun, schematic for hopper. I think this is a book that really would have been elevated with just some very simple basic illustrations. Maybe an example of a blueprint for what a sec unit looks like. That could have been really cool, and would have really remedied this issue in my opinion. But overall, not that big of a deal. These are quick reads, so it's not the end of the world. The books are very fast paced and they go from A to B very quickly, so it doesn't exactly ruin your reading experience. But for me, it does cause me to have problems really getting into the world when I'm struggling to visualize things. The last thing I want to talk about is, why are these books such a fucking rip-off? They cost about £15 per book. They're 150 pages each. That is £1 per 10 pages. That's crazy. The paperbacks are a bit more fairly priced, but I've not been able to find anywhere that sells the fucking paperbacks for these. Not only are they poorly priced, but the hardbacks are really poor quality in my opinion. What I mean by this is they don't have any art on the actual cover. All of the art is on the shitty dust covers that you get, and although I do like the front covers, I think that the art all being on the dust cover and not being on the actual hardback when it costs £15 fucking for a 150 page book is an absolute piss take. For example, my copy of Dreams of the Dying, which is a beautifully produced book that has illustrations and lots of extra content, as well as art on the actual bareback of the book, cost £27 and is 800 pages long. Really, I just don't see the justification for the expenditure here. Maybe the books were like so popular, I don't know, maybe there was some kind of bubble that we're looking to financially exploit. Something that is slightly ironic for a series of books that is supposed to be criticising corporate overlords and excessive profiteering. But for this price, I would expect these hardcovers to have art on the actual covers, and I expect them to actually be really high quality prints, considering they're about half the length of your average book, and cost more, relatively, than what I would expect a really high quality book to cost. Seriously, what the hell is going on with the price of these books? So yeah, overall, despite all my criticisms of these books, I do want to roll round to my original point, which is Murderbot as a character is great. These books are about Murderbot as a character. They're about Murderbot's journey, and I really want to see where Murderbot goes as a character. I think Murderbot is really well presented and realised as a character, and I think ultimately that's what people love about these books. They love Murderbot, and I love Murderbot too. That's why I'm going to keep reading these books. I'm looking forward to reading the first actual full-length novel. I'm going to be reading them in chronological order, not in release order. That means I will be reading Fugitive Telemetry before I read the actual first novel, just because I think that makes sense. I really do actually like these books, despite how much it sounds like I'm ragging on them. I can't really put into words just how well the things that I've said are done well in these books are done. I think the things that this book does well, it does so fucking well. And overall, I want to say I've really enjoyed the first two books. The first book, I thought it was like, it was okay. It was enough to get me to read the second book. The second book I really liked. I thought the second book overall was just a massive upgrade from the first. The characters, specifically Murderbot and Art in the second book, are great. I really hope Art turns up again in the later books, because I really fucking liked that character, and really want to see where Murderbot goes next. I just want to see what Murderbot chooses to do with its life. I want to see what Murderbot decides is important to it. I want to see Murderbot grow as a person, and that's really saying a lot, because so far I've read 250 page novellas and a bit of another 150 page novella. I'm totally smitten with Murderbot as a character. So if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about the quality of the character writing in this book, that is to say, the quality of the character writing of Murderbot, not the side characters. I don't know what else to tell you, really. I think it should be pretty clear that Murderbot itself is very well done and is overall a brilliant character and is worth reading these books for, and it is true. It is worth reading these books just for Murderbot. Make of that what you will. I think that concludes my thoughts on the first two books so far. If these books continue to get better, which they are doing so far, I can see these books being a really good series by the end. Overall, I don't know if these will ever be my favourites, just because, for me, I like to see a strong cast of characters, and so far, this is two strong characters over two books. I can see why people really would like these books. Obviously, Murderbot is a gender-neutral character. I think the representation of a queer normative future is really interesting. I like to believe that in the real world, we're heading towards a future where people can be any sexuality and any gender they want to be without being treated like shit, and I can understand why people want to see that in their fiction. That's all I really have to say. If you're watching this, for some reason, I do recommend these books just because, even for all their flaws, they're really short reads. I'm using these as kind of a palate cleanser after finishing the Mistborn books by Brandon Sanderson, before I go on to reading the Stormlight Archives, and I'm sure you can, if you've read those books, understand why it might be necessary to have a palate cleanser like this. Overall, these are the first sci-fi books I've read in a while, and I think they're really good. I think you should go read them.